Today on Historical Moments we're tackling a big one, the 2003 invasion of Iraq. Understanding why this war happened is actually one of the most important stories of the early 21st century. We're going to keep it straightforward, hit the main points, and by the end you'll have a clear picture of how we got from September 11th to Baghdad in less than 2 years. Let's rewind to 9/11. Al Qaeda terrorists attacked the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. Nearly 3,000 people die. The world changes overnight. President Bush declares a war on terror, and there's massive public support for going after the people responsible. First stop, Afghanistan, where Al Qaeda had training camps and the Taliban government was harbouring Osama bin Laden. That made sense to most people. You go after the people who attacked you. The invasion happens in October 2001. But here's where Iraq enters the picture. By late 2001, some officials in the Bush administration are already talking about Iraq. Why? Well, Saddam Hussein had been a thorn in America's side for over a decade. After the Gulf War in 1991, Iraq was supposed to give up its weapons program. But there were years of cat-and-mouse games with the UN weapons inspectors. Saddam kicked them out in 1998, which made everyone suspicious about what he might be hiding. So you've got this post-9/11 atmosphere where Americans are terrified of the next attack, and you've got this hostile dictator in the Middle East with a history of using chemical weapons and playing games about his weapons programs. That's the cocktail that's brewing. By 2002, the Bush administration is making a public case for war. There were essentially three main arguments. First, weapons of mass destruction. This was the big one. The administration claimed Iraq had active programs to develop chemical, biological, and nuclear weapons. Secretary of State Colin Powell gave his famous presentation to the UN in February 2003, with satellite photos and intelligence reports. The fear was that Saddam could give these weapons to terrorists or use them himself. Remember, he'd already used chemical weapons against the Kurds in Iraq in 1988 and against Iran in the Iran-Iraq War. Second, the terrorism connection. This one was always murkier. The administration suggested links between Saddam's regime and Al Qaeda. They implied that Saddam might have been connected to 9/11 or could facilitate future attacks. The evidence here was always thin, and intelligence agencies were sceptical. But in the post-9/11 climate, even a hint of a connection got people's attention. Third, regime change and democracy. The argument here was that removing Saddam would liberate the Iraqi people from a brutal dictatorship and create a democratic ally in the Middle East. This became more prominent as the other justifications faced scrutiny. The idea was that a democratic Iraq could transform the region, what some called the domino theory, but in reverse. There was also a doctrine called preemption that the Bush administration articulated. Basically, after 9/11, they argued America couldn't wait for threats to materialise. If there was a serious danger, you had to act first. Critics called this a dangerous precedent. Here's the thing, not everyone was convinced. The UN Security Council was divided. France, Germany and Russia opposed the invasion, arguing that weapons inspectors should be given more time. Hans Blix, the chief UN weapons inspector, reported that while Iraq wasn't cooperating, they also weren't finding evidence of active weapons programs. Britain, under Prime Minister Tony Blair, was America's main ally and contributed significant forces. A few other countries joined what was called the Coalition of the Willing: Spain, Italy, Poland and others. But this was much smaller than the broad international coalition of the 1991 Gulf War. The US couldn't get a second UN Security Council resolution explicitly authorising the use of force, which was a big deal diplomatically. Massive protests erupted around the world in early 2003. Millions of people marched against the war in cities from London to Rome to San Francisco. But the Bush administration decided to move forward anyway. On March 19, 2003, the invasion began with airstrikes on Baghdad. The conventional war was swift. US and British forces pushed into Iraq, and by April 9th, Saddam's statue was being toppled in Baghdad. On May 1st, Bush gave a speech on an aircraft carrier in front of a mission accomplished banner. But here's where everything went wrong. The Iraq survey group sent to find the weapons of mass destruction came up empty. No active programs, no stockpiles ready to go. There were some old degraded chemical munitions left over from the 1980s, but nothing like what had been described. This was a massive blow to the war's credibility. The terrorism connection also didn't pan out. The 9/11 Commission found no collaborative relationship between Iraq and Al Qaeda. Saddam and bin Laden actually distrusted each other. One was a secular dictator, the other a religious extremist. The occupation became a nightmare. There was no real plan for post-war Iraq. The Iraqi army was dissolved, putting hundreds and thousands of armed, unemployed men on the streets. Sectarian violence exploded between the Sunnis and the Shias. An insurgency formed, then morphed into a brutal civil war. Al Qaeda in Iraq emerged and would eventually become the ISIS. The war dragged on for years. Thousands of American soldiers died, and hundreds and thousands of Iraqis, maybe more. The final US troops didn't leave until 2011, and even then, violence continued. So why did the West, especially the US, invade Iraq? There's no single answer. It was the combination of genuine fear after 9/11, intelligence failures, ideological beliefs about remaking the Middle East, and political decisions made in an atmosphere of crisis. Some historians argue that there was also concerns about oil and regional power dynamics, though that was never the official justification. What's clear is that the main stated reason, weapons of mass destruction, turned out to be wrong. Whether that was an honest mistake based on bad intelligence or something more deliberate is still debated. What we do know is that the war had enormous consequences. It cost trillions of dollars, destabilized the region and created a refugee crisis, and damaged America's international credibility. The Iraq War remains controversial. Some still argue it was justified to remove a brutal dictator. Others see it as a catastrophic mistake, based on false premises that made the region less safe, not more. What's your take? Let me know in the comments, and if you found this helpful, please like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.